Invasion, USA.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars and welcome to my second classic Chuck Norris film review. Today I am focusing my attention on the 1985 classic canon Chuck Norris vehicle, Invasion, USA. The film is directed by Joseph Zito. Chuck Norris was on board, who helped with the screenplay, and of course starred in the film as Matt Hunter. We also have Richard Lynch, Melissa Prophet, Alexander Zale, Alex Colon, Eddie Jones, and Billy Drago. Now, the film focuses on a group of foreign terrorists who decide to invade the US by doing like guerrilla tactics in neighborhoods, blowing up homes, so on and so forth. And Chuck Norris plays a character called Matt Hunter, who is like a retired agent for some shady government operation, who is brought back out of retirement when Richard Lynch's character Rostov targets him. So Chuck Norris comes back to take him and his group of terrorists down. Right, what are my thoughts on Invasion, USA? Well, this is, from memory anyway, this was probably my first introduction to Chuck Norris in the 80s. I've got really fond memories of my dad renting this on VHS from our local video store, and it's one of those that, you know, was like a staple diet to me in the 80s. There's a small amount of Chuck Norris films that were a big part of my childhood, if you like, and this is probably the one that I've got the most nostalgia for. I just think in many ways it is the perfect action film, certainly the perfect 80s action film. It kind of hovers around, you know, like the classic 80s action films that you've got your Commandos and things like that. And because this is a canon film, it kind of hovers just below those levels. But it is just as entertaining in many, many ways as many of the higher budgeted or more fondly thought of action films from the 80s. Now, Chuck Norris, what can you say about Chuck Norris? The guy is a legend. He really is an icon. And his status has only grown as the years have gone on. At this time in his career in the 80s and 90s, he was kind of regarded as pretty much a B-movie action star. Not a very good actor, all this kind of stuff, and he was only kind of in the movies because of his martial arts status and things like that. I've always liked Chuck Norris. Now, no one's ever going to convince me or anybody else that Chuck Norris is a good actor, because he isn't. But he doesn't need to be. In films like this, you've never really needed Chuck Norris to actually be an actor. The closest I've probably ever seen him to give what you could describe as an acting performance is The Hero and the Terror, which is a film I recently covered on the channel. And I'm sure there's Chuck Norris fans out there could give me many examples of Chuck Norris actually giving a good performance. But this is one of those silent protagonist type films for Chuck Norris. He says very little. He's just there to look cool with his Uzis, taking out bad guys. And it's one of those films where he turns up wherever the bad guys are. He doesn't do any investigating at all as to where they are, or interrogation. Well, there is a couple of interrogation scenes early on, but then they kind of like, sod it, we'll just make him turn up where they are. So he's there every time he's needed. He's there, you know what I mean, taking out the bad guys in increasingly more cool and iconic ways. It is, as I've said, a perfect vehicle for Chuck Norris. And it is, if you like good cheesy action films from the 80s, this definitely has to be on your list if you haven't seen it, because Chuck Norris is great in the film. And it doesn't focus heavily on his martial arts in this film either, you know what I mean? If you're not a fan of martial arts films, or you're not a fan of that sort of action, you don't need to worry. I mean, there are a handful of scenes where you see him do a kick here and there, but most of the time it's just really about the action and the gunplay and explosions, and lots of explosions. And I think another thing that makes this film a good is the fact that it's got a good villain. Now, Richard Lynch was around a lot playing villains in the 80s, certainly, and probably the 90s as well. And he plays a very good villain in this film, Rostov, who is absolutely ruthless. there's some scenes in this that are actually like quite shocking, and so I certainly remember at the time around the time I first watched this, they were quite shocking. The fact of them blowing up like family neighborhoods with bazookas and things like that, and then showing up in neighborhood parties and then just opening fire with shotguns on people, and there's no getting away from it. This is a very, very violent film, and you probably wouldn't be able to get away with much of the violence that this film portrays these days. But that was the 80s, you know what I mean? It didn't really pull any punches, and it had such a cool premise as well, Invasion USA. It was just such a great concept and a great idea, and to have Chuck Norris taking them all out was, a joy to watch. He essentially almost plays like a superhero in this film, you know what I mean? He's just wonderful to watch. There's some absolutely brilliant stunt work as well in this. I mean, you absolutely can't fault the stunt work in this film. I mean, there's some really standout moments in regards to the stunt work. Chuck Norris apparently did the majority of his own stunts in this film as well. And you even get to see him wrestling a crocodile. What's more iconic than Chuck Norris wrestling a crocodile? Or should I say, the crocodile probably submitted to Chuck Norris's awesomeness. From doing a little bit of research on this film as well, and I did read that Chuck Norris was really keen on hiring Whoopi Goldberg to play the journalist in the film. Now, I actually think the journalist, is it Melissa Prophet who plays the journalist in this film, is kind of wasted. She doesn't do an awful lot. I suspect much of her role was cut out of it. But Chuck Norris wanted Whoopi Goldberg, which I think would have been a very clever move to add a little bit of humour into the film, potentially. But he was overruled by the director, Joseph Zito, and Chuck Norris was so miffed by that because he thought Whoopi Goldberg was the better choice. He never worked with the director again after this. There was a sequel. There was supposed to be a sequel to this film called Avenging Force. And Chuck Norris turned it down, so it went to Michael Dudikoff as well instead, but they didn't turn it into like a sequel or a prequel to this film. It's just a standalone film, even though the character that Michael Dudikoff plays in Avenging Force is called Matt Hunter, I believe. So it's the same name as the Chuck Norris character in this film, just not the same character. And the scene as well, where they're blowing up the neighborhood with the bazookas and all that kind of stuff that looks so impressive and quite shocking. Those houses in that neighborhood were slated for demolition, apparently, so they were given permission to basically blow everything up, which they certainly did in the film. So, yeah, if you've never seen Invasion USA, if you've always been interested in, like, Chuck Norris and his movies and you've never really taken the plunge, it's a great place to start, if I'm honest. Invasion USA. For many people, it's arguably his most iconic role. I'm sure Chuck Norris fans will fire a whole load of Chuck Norris films in the comments that they prefer to this. This is right up there, I think, in regards to his most notable roles, because it was such a big hit on home video. I mean, it was released in the cinemas. I don't think it did particularly well. It probably did, reasonably well. But I bet it didn't cracked 20 million certainly at the box office, but on home video it was a massively popular rental for many years, right into the 2000s, I believe. So it was a huge hit on home video and DVDs and things like that. So yeah, I don't think you can pick this up on Blu-ray in the UK. I've seen it on import. It's something I'll hopefully look to add to my collection in the future, certainly. So yeah, check out Invasion USA if you've never seen it, and look forward to more Chuck Norris reviews coming up on the channel. Thanks for watching.